This is Reasons We Serve, a channel dedicated to the women and men in law enforcement. This is episode 81, part 2, featuring Ralph Friedman, the most decorated New York Police Department detective of all time. Detective Friedman grew up in the 1950s and 1960s in the Bronx, a neighborhood mainly consisting of Jewish, Italian, and Irish residents, which he described as sheltered from the outside world. As a child, Detective Friedman had a few interactions with the police, but none of them had a significant impact on him. During a casual conversation in high school, some of his friends mentioned that they would be taking the police entrance exam. He decided to join them on the morning of the test and ended up taking the exam himself. This marked the beginning of his journey in law enforcement. Detective Friedman began his law enforcement career in the NYPD in 1968 as a fingerprint technician. He was later assigned to the 41st Precinct, also known as Fort Apache, as an officer on foot patrol. Right from the start, Detective Friedman was a proactive police officer who actively sought out criminals both on and off duty, quickly earning a reputation as someone who got things done. He was eventually promoted to the anti-crime unit, where he worked alongside some of his heroes, and through his hard work, he achieved the rank of Detective Third Grade. Throughout this three-part episode, Detective Friedman shares insights into his career and provides a glimpse of what it was like working in New York City during the 1970s and 1980s. While serving as an officer and detective for the NYPD, Friedman made 2,000 arrests, including 100 off-duty arrests, and provided assistance in 6,000 cases. He was involved in 15 shootings, resulting in the deaths of 4 suspects. Unfortunately, Detective Friedman's career was cut short after just 14 years due to a severe on-duty car accident, which led to his medical retirement as a second-grade detective. It's safe to say that Friedman accomplished more in his 14-year career than most officers do in twice that time. He served during one of New York's most challenging periods, marked by fiscal crisis, political disillusionment, an out-of-control welfare system, and escalating crime and drug use. With his unwavering determination and commitment to putting criminals behind bars, Detective Friedman stands as the most decorated detective in the history of the NYPD. Detective Friedman has been the subject of numerous articles and interviews. He is the co-author of the book Street Warrior, NYPD's Most Decorated Detective and the Era That Created Him, based on his career. There is a 2017 television series currently available on Amazon Prime called Street Justice: The Bronx that was also based on his career. Friedman was also featured in the movie Tattoo with Bruce Dern, and he was the technical advisor to the prequel movie for The Sopranos called The Many Saints of Newark.
So you're the most decorated detective in NYPD history, right? But you flat out said you had other cops that you worked with that were your heroes who were great
Absolutely.
cops, right? So do you think, I don't want to call it, I don't think it was luck. I certainly don't think it was luck. I think it was that need to put people in jail.
I felt I was doing the right thing.
Yeah.
You know, when you put a bad guy away, it's a very good feeling.
Yeah.
These people prey on the weak, on the old, on the very young, infants, old ladies, old men, disabled people. So how do you rob somebody who's sitting in a wheelchair?
Yeah.
How do you beat up an 85-year-old woman? We still see that stuff on the news today.
Yeah.
It makes me feel good taking them off the street. You see today there's some kind of thing going on. Guys walking down the street and just sucker punches an old woman.
Mm-hmm.
We just saw that like 2 nights ago. An old woman, he fractured her nose. And a woman's walking a dog, standing there. And a guy comes up behind her that's 1/3 her age and punches her with all his might in the face.
Yeah.
That person shouldn't be on the street.
Yeah.
And I feel good if I could take him off. I'm stopping other people from being victimized.
But do you think my point is, do you think it's divine intervention? Do you think it's just you had an innate ability to go after people because you have other great cops that are putting a lot of people in jail, but you just seem to be doing, I don't want to say a little bit more, but you're doing stuff off the job, on the job, everything else.
I just enjoyed it so much.
Yeah.
I think I excelled in spotting guys with guns or having that sixth sense. I mean, these are what anti-crime cops develop this even more.
Yeah.
They're going a little more beyond.
Yeah.
A lot, and most cops do. Now, proactive policing is what we were doing, but reactive policing is still something we need.
Yeah.
It's funny because a boss was addressing the troops once, and when we were there, when they turned us out, and they said, Ralph makes a lot of collars, but if all of you made collars like that, I'd have no one on the street, and there'd be no one to answer 911 calls. So you need cops doing that too.
Yeah.
We can't all be in court at the same time. There'd be nobody out there.
Yeah.
But you need cops to respond to jobs, and they respond to a lot of emergencies that need to be taken care of. They deliver babies. They rush heart attack victims to the hospital. There's a lot of things that cops in uniform driving around do that, without a doubt, 100% necessary and have to be done. And they're heroes too.
Yeah.
It's just the line that I went into. I enjoyed the action part of it, and I liked sniffing out the bad guy and getting him.
Yeah. So you're on patrol, you foot patrol, then you go on to patrol. As you're doing this, at what point do you have a goal? You go, I want to be a homicide detective.
Well, I wanted to be an anti-crime cop.
How come?
Because those are the guys involved in the action. Like I said before, a uniform answers calls and deters crime. Because people see you're standing on the corner, they're not going to commit a crime.
Right.
So it's a deterrent.
Yeah.
You start off there and you learn your footing. Then you get to the car, and then I always wanted to be anti-crime because those were the guys I looked up to. But I looked up to uniform guys too, because I could tell you a story of a uniform cop I saw that just rocked my world. This guy, George Wadicki, he went out on patrol, he's in uniform, and he wasn't far from the precinct, and there was a burglary. And burglars went up to the roof, 2 guys, and he went up to the roof, he by himself, right? He got up to the roof, and they was, when you come out on the roof, there's like a little roof above it where the staircase is. The guys were waiting for him up there. And the guy jumped off there and stabbed him in the shoulder with a knife, right? And he beat the shit out of these 2 perpetrators. And he had the knife was in his shoulder. It was sticking up. You didn't see the blade, just the handle. It was sticking up. And he dragged them by the collar. This was something out of a cartoon. Dragged them into the precinct. 2 guys. And he stabbed with a knife. I mean, there's no way that, this kind of thing is like, but this is what I've seen with my own 2 eyes.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. So anyway, getting back to that. Where were we at?
So we were talking about what you became your goal
I
was
wanted to be anti-crime because when I was a rookie and I was in uniform on foot patrol and in a car, I saw these anti-crime cops coming in with collars that was so outstanding. They were grabbing shooting victims, bringing in these guns. I just dreamed of doing that. And also another guy, every single day, I saw him coming in with a felony narcotics. And when I worked in the 4-1, the only drug we saw was heroin. We did see methadone, but that was liquid heroin given by the city later on. But all you saw was heroin. And this guy was bringing in felony weight, and he was in uniform, Stanley Gam. And and he had a rack on him too, all these medals and stuff, because he worked in uniform. And every day, and I always wanted to be like that. And he went into anti-crime before me, and I wound up being his partner.
Wow.
And there was other guys like that too that I looked up to. These were my heroes. And then to get into that unit and work with them and then excel myself was, the epitome of my career. You have heroes. It's like, I guess, like a guy is learning how to play guitar, and next thing he's playing with someone on the top billboards. You know what I mean? Or being a kid in school playing baseball, and then you go on the Yankees. Here I am, a rookie in uniform, and next thing I'm working with anti-crime cops that I look up. Those were my heroes.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, Ralph, because like I said, I watched several interviews with you, and one of the things that you said was, and I think you still have this reverence toward the police. It's like, look.
Well, that's why I do these interviews too, and wrote the book and do the show.
Right.
I want to, I tried to write a book once before, and it didn't take off. It was 1978. I still have the letters of rejection. They wanted a guy who saved the Pope or the president, something national.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I found the right co-writer, and we did the book, my co-writer, Pat Piccarelli, who was also a cop, and he happened to be in that elite unit, TPF. So working with him to write the book, Street Warrior, he knew everything. I didn't have to explain stuff. Like talking to you.
Yeah.
You were in law enforcement,
Mm-hmm.
and you understand the things we've seen and go through. But when you talk to a civilian, I would say certain terms, and then you got to stop and explain the whole thing, and he wasn't grasping the conversation. But we wrote the book it was 2015 to 2017, because it takes 2 years to get a book out. This wasn't a self-published book, which most people write. They could write anything, put anything down, and it comes out right away on Amazon. This was by one of the big publishers, and there's a whole process of legalese. They have teams that edit the book. Then you have paragraph editors, you have line editors. You have to do things through a lawyer. Then there's another team that picks the cover and the colors. Then another team that picks, you got to submit like 100 pictures, and they'll use like 20 of them. It's a very, very big, then there's a binder team, what the binder is going to be. It's very serious, and it takes years, and then everything's got to be proven. I kept like 85% of the paperwork. So because they have what's called fact-finding teams that are led by an attorney. I did 85% of their work, but they want to prove that everything I write was true. And all the stories are true that went on TV, because it went on Discovery first. Then I got picked up by ID Channel, and now I'm picked up by Amazon Prime. So the show, Street Justice the Bronx, is on Amazon Prime, and the book, Street Warrior, is on Amazon also. Mm-hmm. But you got to prove everything. It's a big, and I was really lucky that they both came out at the same time, which is very rare, even for the big actors and stuff. It just fell in line, and they both came out at the same time, the TV series and the book.
Yeah.
And the reason I wanted to use Street Warrior in the TV series, I was going to make a brand out of it, but they didn't like the name Street Warrior, because on the channels that it was going, was more like, they thought it had more to do with street racing, in the car world, because they do a lot of car stuff on the Discovery Channel and ID. Yeah. And ID was the parent company. And I had to choose others. I came up with Street Justice, the Bronx.
How long are you on patrol before you get to anti-crime?
Well, uniform patrol was a little over a year.
Okay.
Then I went into anti-crime for almost 4 years.
And anti-crime
was in the 4-1 precinct.
Yeah. But you're anti-crime. You're in plain clothes.
You're on patrol, but you're not supposed to take radio calls.
But are you in uniform?
You're in plain clothes.
Okay. So before we start talking about anti-crime, when do you start doing the tattoos?
Well, I first got my tattoo at 20 when my father died.
Okay.
He was totally against tattoos. He would have killed me if I got a tattoo.
Okay.
Once he died, I wanted a tattoo, and I knew I could handle my mother, But she wasn't too happy about it. Most parents don't like tattoos, and then being Jewish was really, they didn't like that. But I got a tattoo. And the tattoo thing, you get something you always wanted. You wanted a tattoo, so you get it.
Yeah.
Then you start off with, well, I got to balance it out. So you get a tattoo on the other side. And then you see something you really like, so you get that on your forearm. And then you get another tattoo to balance that. Next thing you know, you're covered. But it also helped me in my career, because as I'm getting these tattoos through the years, I get into this anti-crime work. And anti-crime, you're supposed to blend into the neighborhood. We use certain cars that the department gave us, and everybody knew them. But we also use cars outside the department. We were authorized to use our own cars. We were authorized to take cars out of the pound that were impounded. We used to go to the Whitestone Pound, pick out a car, and use it for a week or 2 or a month. So that we didn't have the department unmarked cars, because the people knew that cars, So we were authorized to use our own cars. And as the tattoos build up, you start to blend in, because the thugs had tattoos and the people in the neighborhood had tattoos, and it just helped you.
But it doesn't seem that it's a usual thing at that point. Now everybody has tattoos and everything else.
Yes.
But is Is it frowned upon when you're in the NYPD? Is it frowned upon? Do other people have tattoos? It just seems like an unusual thing to do back in the day.
Yeah, it was. Well, it wasn't like frowned upon because a lot of, like I said before, a lot of veterans were coming on the job
Okay.
and they had military tattoos.
Okay.
But they had a couple, and usually your sleeves covered them up. You know, you had certain seasons you wore long sleeves and jackets.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it would be more frowned upon. People didn't get tattoos on their head or their neck or their hands.
Mm-hmm.
I got some tattoos on my hand, but I did that much later
Mm-hmm.
because if I always wanted to cover it up, if I went to the bank for a loan or I was doing real estate for a while, I could cover my tattoos, go with long sleeves, you know, but once you have them on your hands, that's it, you're exposed.
Yeah.
But I still never went to my neck or head. But my life ain't over, so I can't say that ain't gonna happen. You never, I can literally say in my life, I don't know what's coming next. You know, my life has taken a lot of turns. I've done a lot of things. I had a very good life. And, you know, I do a lot of my promotion stuff too, in not only to promote myself, but to thank the cops along the way that I worked with. I tried to put as many as I could in my book, as many in my show. I profiled some of them. And to thank the cops for the job they do and bring it to the light of what the police do for the public.
Yeah.
You know, besides promoting myself.
Right.
But the cops do so much. And I always, if you see my other podcasts as well as your own, I will always speak good about the police and what they do. You know, they say there's the thin blue line, and that's what separates us from being a jungle. That thin line is the protection for the public. That's the difference between order and chaos. And the blue line represents the police that do it.
Yeah.
You know, and other heroes also are firemen, but their job is a skilled labor. That's how I separate the police and fire. They risk their lives. They do a great job, but they're doing a skilled labor. They're fighting a fire. And there's different ways to fight different fires. Police deal with a human factor, and you never know how a human's going to react. Are they nuts? Are they psycho? Are they going to pull a gun on you? Going to pull a knife on you? They're going to stab you in the back, stab you in the stomach. Human factor is untold what could happen.
Yeah. It's very interesting, Ralph, because like I said, I've watched a whole bunch of what you've said, and I think one of the most poignant thing you said was, look, heroes are the cops, right? There's guys that run toward the danger and not away. And so you were having this discussion with one of the hosts, and they were talking about athletes and how they're perceived as heroes.
I hate when they call athletes heroes. That kills me. You know, athletes are great athletes. You know, that's what they are.
Yeah.
They're not heroes by any stretch of the imagination. And, you know, there was a time when, we'll say, take 9/11. That showed what heroes are. You saw all kinds of different police departments, firemen, EMS, first responders, even construction workers running towards the towers, and thousands, tens of thousands running the other way. These people went in there. People loved the police and fire then. They were posting about police bringing them meals and then it faded away. Then they forgot.
Yeah.
But you know what? And all those cops suffered. It was way after my time. You know, I like I said, I retired in 1984. That was in 2001. And people forgot how they rushed in there. They put their lives on the line, and so many of them lost their lives. And they're still losing their lives. More people are dying in these years than happened that day with related cancers and stuff unheard of. And we don't know how much stuff went into their DNA that went into unborn children after that. You know, but there's people suffering out there. And every single one of them, when you hear them talk, say they would do it again. And I know they would.
Yeah.
That's a hero.
And the funniest line that you said was, look, the guy just catches a ball. My dog can catch a ball.
You teach dogs. You see SEALs do all that stuff all the time. They throw balls into the hoop. That's not a hero. That's a trained athlete.
Okay, let's get into anti-crime. You're there You've made the big time. That's where you want to be. What are you working on?
Well, I'm trying to get the best collars I could. You want to get quality collars. And quality collars back then, being a street guy, you want to get guns and robberies. Those are, well, obviously homicides and stuff, but we didn't run into that many of them. Guns and robberies are there all the time.
Mhm.
And those are the two things that lead to homicides.
Yeah.
So when you're getting those, when you take a gun off the street, you're stopping someone from being shot later on or killed.
Yeah.
And you want to get these quality arrests that you pick up on your own. Now, we don't respond to radio calls. We don't pick them up, but we do back them up. You know, you're working in a precinct, you know it's a rough precinct, you know there's violence and cops are a danger. So if a unit picks up, a uniform officer picks up a radio call and there's no other units available because everyone's busy, we would say 4-1 anti-crime team will back up Sector Eddie. You know, because you don't want guys going alone. And we would back up our brother officers in uniform. So that's what we would do. But you want to get out there in anti-crime and make the best arrest you could. That's our job. And I like doing it. And I wanted to go out every day and get a gun or a robbery collar.
So I think this is before you get promoted to first grade detective.
No, I didn't make first grade.
No,
I got third.
Oh, sorry. Before third grade. I apologize.
Yeah, it runs the other way.
Yeah.
3,
So
2,
there was
1.
a story that you told in the book where you had made, I think it was called a bribery. But anyway, you were scouting out this thing and it looked like people were taking bets. And anyway, you arrested this guy and brought him in. And you made your boss look good. You remember that story?
Well, I always made my boss look good. You know, that's another part of the job you got to do.
Yeah.
You always got to make your boss look good.
Yeah.
And making my boss look good had a lot of advantages to me.
Yeah.
Now, give you an example.
Okay.
I was allowed to go to court. I didn't like going to court. No one likes the paperwork and the court part.
Yeah.
And you'd have to go to court, you do a day shift, right? So you'd have to do an 8 to 4, and then you'd be stuck in court all day, right? Because the judge didn't come in till like 9:30. They hear the private lawyers first. Then lunch comes. Next thing you know, it's 2, 3 o'clock. You get back and you go home. So when I worked out with my bosses, they would let me go to court. We didn't have cell phones, but I would be home. So I would say, my boss would let the DA call me when my case was coming up, and I wouldn't have to go to the precinct and start my shift. They would start when I got to the court. So the DA would call me because they knew us. When you were an active cop, the DAs know you because they would see you every day.
Mm-hmm.
So they would call me at home and I would report straight to the courthouse and start my shift then. So if they called me at 10 o'clock, my shift would start 11 o'clock at the courthouse.
Mm-hmm.
So then I would get in before lunch and I could come back and make an arrest. Or if it wasn't going to be until after lunch, they would call me during lunch and say, well, your case is coming up after lunch. So I'd start like 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. And I'd be in the court from 1 to 4 or 2 to 4. Mm. And I could be on the street the rest of the hours and make an arrest.
Yeah.
So my bosses let me do that because first I was making them look good and they trusted me to go to the court and do what I had to do.
Yeah.
That was one thing. The second thing is being a detective, detectives dressed up. But I never got dressed. I never wore a suit and tie or jacket. They would let me come in and wear my street clothes and let me get away with that for 90% of the time. And what they did was when they assigned me cases, I started out working with detectives, but then they let anti-crime guys work with me. They would assign to me all the robberies, and I would work with anti-crime cops, and I would be able to dress the way I wanted. They let me do that, and which was a big plus because I didn't like clothes, you know, getting dressed up clothes.
Well, this was a story that you had been watching something going on through a window. It looked like the guy was taking bets. You brought him in. You weren't even sure what the guy had done, and there was a suit that was in the precinct, and he came up to you and goes, "Do you know who you are?"
I'll tell you. This is when I was really a rookie.
Okay.
It was way back. I was in uniform on foot, and I saw a guy taking what's called policy, right? And policy is numbers,
okay,
right? And that's he was doing it in a bodega, which is a grocery store in the ghetto. So I saw him doing this, and I watched him for a while. Now, I knew it was illegal, but I didn't know how to express it. So I came into the precinct, right? And I brought it before a desk. And the desk officer then, he said, "Kid, you know what you got?" I said, "Well, I know it's against the law." And they would help you. Desk officers were usually a sergeant or a lieutenant. Because after a while, years later, way after, they had cops on the desk. I think they're back to sergeants and lieutenants now. But they would guide you in what you had. So I was a rookie, and I didn't know what I had. So he came out from behind the desk, took me behind, and he told me how to testify and what I did. And then I was processing the prisoner, and there was a boss there. He was a deputy inspector, which was one rank over a captain, and he was in charge of the precinct. And he came over to me and said, "Hey, kid, you know what you got here?" And I said, "No." He says, "You got a KG." So I didn't know what that was, I said, "Oh, yeah." He says, "Yeah, you got a KG. You know what that is, right?" I said, "No." He says, "That's a known gambler." And he took me back in the room, and there was like a bulletin board with a pull-down shade on it. And he pulls it up, and his picture was there. And that was a known gambler. So he was like arrested a lot of times. And the bosses this boss specifically liked it because he was trying to get into PMD. That's the Public Morals Division. You either handled vice or drugs, right? So he wanted to get into this vice stuff. And getting known gamblers made him look good. So he says, "This is a good collar, kid. This is a good collar. I'm going to give you a day off." And back then they could give you a day off. I think it was called, I think it changed names over the years, but like a commander's day. You did something outstanding, they give you a day off. They had the authority and the power to do this. This was old policing. This is 1970s, 50 years ago, 54 years ago. So he was very happy about it. I didn't even know what I had. I just knew it was against the law. But the lieutenant helped me, and the captain, the DI, deputy inspector, he gave me a day off. He said, "Great collar, kid."
So eventually you're in anti-crime. You get promoted to detective, but you get promoted to detective specifically because of your bribery arrests.
That was a very ironic thing because I made a lot of briberies, but I didn't consider them action or such a big deal.
But can you explain what they are?
Well, bribery is when, going back to when the corruption era was, and they were rooting out corruption in the Knapp Commission. So if someone offered you money to do a specific act in relation to a crime, so a guy would come in and try to bribe you, say, "Listen, I'll give you $1,000. Let me go for the gun charge." What we would do is we have to notify a supervisor, and then they would notify internal affairs, and they would come down there immediately and wire you up. You would be wired, and then you try to get the perpetrator of the first crime to reiterate the bribery. So I had like 16 bribery arrests, and that's originally, I had a great record, but I wasn't getting promoted for the stuff I was doing. Then all of a sudden I got promoted by the Integrity Review Board for making a lot of bribery arrests. So I was getting wired up a lot and making bribery arrests that were verifiable bribery arrests. And the department was wild about that because they could publicize it, and it was part of like rooting out, showing that the cops are honest.
Yeah.
So they were very happy about that. And like I said, I knew part of my job was always to make your boss look good. If I did good, my boss looked good. So it was beneficial to everybody.
Yeah.
But ironically, I got promoted, not for all the hundreds. Now I was at like 1,000 arrests already in my career, and I get promoted for, the Integrity Review Board.
Interesting.
It was just like ironic. I made I had multiple gun battles at the time, killed a guy who shot cops, all this stuff, and I can, get promoted for bribery arrests. Hey, you got to take it whichever way you can.
Exactly.
I had letters where well, later on, there was a letter when I got to second grade. There was letters written, I have right there on the wall, that I led the entire detective bureau for 5 continuous years in arrests.
Wow.
For 5 continuous years, I led the whole detective bureau in the amount of arrests I made. And it was publicized in a lot of newspapers
Yeah.
and stuff. You know, it was just, I had a great career, and it was fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well let's get into some stories here. So you get into 15 shootings over your career. 2 of those you've shot a couple dogs, but needless to say, that's a lot of shootings. So can you talk about the Bobby shooting?
Well, that was my partner, Bobby DeMattis. And me and him were out on patrol. It was anti-crime. We were cops assigned to the anti-crime unit in the 41st Precinct. And we were, actually, at that time, we had a very good undercover car. We were driving a yellow taxi. And I was the driver, and Bobby posed as the passenger in back. And it was a legit cab. Had the meter, the signs on the side, everything, regular cab. It was a department car, by the way. That was a department car. So we were out on patrol looking for crime or suspicious people that we could follow. And we came across this gang of youths. And we figured they were looking for trouble, right? So we start following them. And we figure they're going to rob somebody. And we see them approaching people, but not much taking place. We find out later on what's going on. They were asking people for money, but they were getting to the point where we thought it would be like a robbery or an intimidation robbery, where they surround people and make you feel like you're intimidated to give them your money. But ironically, like things happen, it all turned around. We're sitting across the street. It was 4 lanes of traffic. And they go to this guy. Probably they asked him for money. And he told them to fuck off. And they called him a cheap bastard. And he pulls out a gun and shoots the kid, one of the 15-year-olds, right in the chest in front of us. I gas the car, shoot across the street, right up to him. We jump out of the car, and I start chasing him up the street, and he starts firing while he's running. He's firing at me, I'm firing at him, and we're having a running gun battle up Fox Street. My partner, Bobby, runs across the street. Fox is a 1 lane going north. Bobby runs across the street, so we triangulate him, but there's 2 parked cars, one on each side, and Bobby's running there so we can get him triangulated in, and all of a sudden he stops because he runs out of bullets, and he kneels behind the car and starts reloading. It wasn't an automatic, it was a revolver. And I stop dead, and I'm out of bullets now, and I pull out a second gun because I always carried 2 .38s. And I position myself behind a stoop, which is a flight of stairs going into a building, but also a flight of stairs leading down to an apartment. So I'm behind here, and all he could really see from me is like the bridge of my nose up, and he sees Bobby. Bobby's ducked. Bobby hasn't fired yet because he hasn't got a clear shot. Now, when he reloads, he starts firing 1 shot at Bobby, 1 shot at me. Now, this guy is drunk and high on drugs, which later was proved by the autopsy. But he has the presence of mind to put 1 bullet at a time in each of our directions. Now, I pull out the second gun, like I said, 38. I'm lining up my shots. I don't see how I can miss. And I'm shooting, and I'm taking my time. It's almost like in slow motion to me. And I don't see him going down. Now, Bobby still hasn't fired. And the guy pops up, shoots at Bobby. Now Bobby got the timing down. So when the guy turned to peg a shot at me, Bobby fires and hits him in the shoulder because I see him grab his shoulder, and he goes down. So I run up to him. I got 1 bullet left now. I run up to him and to see that he's down, but he's starting to raise the gun. He raises his arm with the gun in his hand. So I'm standing over him, and I fire a shot into his head between his eyes. I kill him right there. And now an autopsy leads that he was hit like 8 times. And I have a good grouping in the stomach, and he didn't go down. Why? Probably because it had so many drugs and alcohol in them, but didn't put them down.
Wow.
I don't want to talk bad about the 38 because I used it all my career
Yeah.
and it served my purposes well. I never did an automatic, you know. But I did use the automatic once. That's a whole different story. But the guy went down and the kid recovered. He only lived because we were there and we were able to get an ambulance there immediately. Bobby radioed. When Bobby had the radio, he jumped out of the car before he ran up the street to triangulate him in. Bobby called for backup, a 1013 shots fired, and he called for an ambulance. And that definitely saved the kid's life that an ambulance got there so fast.
Yeah.
We got him to a hospital. Otherwise, he would have bled out.
Yeah. So how do you, Ralph, after all the shootings that you got into, you know, I've talked to other people who have gotten a bunch of shootings in their career as well. One guy said, hey, look, after the first shooting, I had an issue of sleeping. And then I realized this whole adrenaline thing. And I used to go out and work out and go for a run and everything. Did it ever affect you? How did you deal with shootings?
Never affected me. And I think there was a couple of factors. First, working in like somewhere like the 4-1, that you see this violence all the time and you deal with it, that it's in your mind there's violence and you're going to run into it. Second, the training in the police academy prepares you for this. I don't know how they train now because obviously I've been out X amount of years, decades, but they always taught us how to respond, how to react, they train you for what you may have to do. And I worked in proactive policing units like the 4-1 anti-crime. And we knew we might have to do this someday. And what I did was my training. And, you know, it's funny that we had this running gun battle because to show you how the press or the media could take things out of context. While I'm having this running gun battle and I'm aiming for this guy, I could have shot him in the back because he was giving me his back and only turning around his head and his arm to shoot at me. So if I would have hit him during the running gun battle, I would have shot him in the back, which none of my bullets did at that time. When I actually hit him is when I took a stance and was able to line up my shots and I hit him in the stomach when he was crouched reloading. But it's the training. And the other side of the coin, taking the life, is the other side of the coin is I saved my partner's life and my life and probably that kid's life. And who knows in the future or what other bystanders. But when you take a life, you got to be justified. They drill that into you. And I know I did the right thing. I did what my training taught me, what I had to do to survive. And I felt victorious. I felt good. I did the right thing. And obviously, I got justifiable homicide on my record by a grand jury, which verified with what I did, confirmed that I was correct, which I knew I was correct. But you feel good because you saved lives. You saved your partner's life or my own life or a civilian life.
Yeah, because it's interesting. You had a philosophy. It wasn't about taking a person's life. It was about saving a life.
So I felt good about that.
Yeah.
And like I said, we don't try to kill somebody. We stop the threat. He happened to die as a result of that. If he would have left his gun down when I ran up to him, I may not have had to use that last shot that killed him.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have used that shot. If he was gun out of his hand and he stopped, we would have got him assistance. Cops do that all the time. Even today when you see them shoot somebody, they try to give them mouth to mouth or they call for an ambulance and they do what they can. We're not taught to kill and no one wants to kill. You're taught to stop the threat.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But if his actions didn't dictate what our actions had to be, like I said before, they make the decision.
Yeah.
We react.
Yeah. So I think you never lost grasp of your roots in terms of dealing with patrol officers. You never land, I'm a detective, I'm above you guys, right?
Not at all.
So tell me about the story where, hey, you're listening to these guys and the guy brings in the story about slapping around the girl.
Well, when I was in the detective bureau, I've always had this rapport with the police, uniformed guys. And they would always bring me stuff that they thought could be investigated or followed more, but they couldn't do it because of, the position they were in. It might have took follow-up or time or stakeouts. So I always had a good rapport because I had the reputation of following what officers told me, right? And they would give you good stuff, So one time they responded to an assault. So they went to this house and they interviewed the girl. And it wasn't really an assault because you need an injury for an assault. And her ex-husband came in to town because he lived in California. This was New York. And he slapped her around a little. And she reported it to the police. And while they were leaving, they were taking a report for harassment, which is not even a crime. That's a violation. Crimes are misdemeanors and felonies. So as they're walking out the door, she blurts out, "Oh, by the way, my husband's wanted by the FBI." Now, all cops know that sometimes people will make up stories or tell them stuff in reference to somebody they want to get even with or to make it look worse so the police will take an action. People say, "Oh, he's got a gun." But he really didn't have a gun, but they want you to take an immediate action. But in this case, the officers made note of that, which was the correct thing to do because it should be investigated. And they came in, before they filed their 61, which is a complaint report, they came up to see me. And they said, "Hey, Ralph, this woman says her husband's wanted by the FBI. I don't know if there's anything to it. You want to check it out?" I said, "Of course." And it's wound up to be one of my best cases of my career. So I told them, fill out the crime report, the 61, and send it up refer it to me. Normally, that would never be referred to the detectives. I said, send it to me. And the Detective Bureau is not based on arrests. Detectives are evaluated and the bosses are evaluated by clearance, which means how you finish off the case. It could end in an arrest. It could be other outcomes, but they want them cleared. And I'll go into that in a little while too, on how I invented something I really feel I invented it, and it made bosses look fantastic. But what I did was, in this case, not to get off subject, but I told them to refer the harassment violation 61 to me. So I took it. They did it. It took a minute or two, and I brought it up to me. And now I started making phone calls on this. Well, first I called the complainant to get more information. I wanted the guy's date of birth, more on the pedigree. So I knew what I was talking about. And she started telling me he's wanted by the FBI and telling me he robs banks and stuff like that. I'm listening and I'm saying, wow, this is getting pretty crazy. But I follow it through. So I call the warrant squad, and there is a warrant out for him. And I call the FBI, right? And the FBI, I get this guy, and he starts talking down to me. You know how the FBI, I think some things never change, as we see in today's news reports. But anyway, he says to me, yeah, this guy broke out of prison twice. Broke out of federal prison in California and in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. He tells me he robbed the bank and he got 30 years, and then he was sentenced to another 6 years in absentia, meaning they had the trial, and he got convicted of escape, but they didn't have him in custody. But they had the trial and convicted him. He owed another 6 years. So, and then he starts to tell me, yeah, like he's on our most wanted, but he sort of starts to talk down to me, tell me, yeah, well, listen, he's on the most wanted list, vowed never to be taken alive. He's armed and dangerous. We've been looking at him for 18 years, giving me the routine like, yes, detective, don't bother. We haven't gotten him, so you certainly won't. That was the attitude that I got.
And I'm sure you're just like, I'm getting him no matter what you're saying now.
Exactly. Now I tell my partner about it, and I go to the boss, and I say to the boss, this is what we got. And he looks, now my boss knew me already, and he's already done things to test me, and we're on good footings now, and he knows what I'm about. And he says to me, looks at me and my partner and says, Ralph, can we get this guy? I said, if you take me off the chart, I'll get this guy. Now, what that means off the chart, See, New York City detectives are constantly catching cases. You could catch 5, 6, 7 cases a day. It's like shoveling shit against the tide. It never ends. But as an FBI agent, they get unlimited money and they get unlimited time and resources. And they have one case. That's what they focus on. They're laser focused, tunnel vision. They got the case. If I say to my boss, take me off the case, it means I stopped catching other cases. And that means the other detectives in my unit got to pick up the slack. So if they're catching 6 or 7, now they're going to catch 7, 8, or 9 a day because I'm not there. It's like I don't exist. I have my one case, me and my partner. That's 2 of us off the radar, you know. I said, you got to take us off, we'll catch him. He says, okay, go for it. So he gives us a free rein, and me and my partner start pursuing. We start digging up everything we could. We do our leg, and believe me, it ain't like today. You don't go on a computer, you don't Google, you gotta go through hand records, you gotta go through pictures, you gotta do leg work, stakeouts, talking. It's nothing like today, you know? So we start doing that, right? And we developed the case. And to make a long story short, because we got a lot to cover, but to make it a long story short, we developed the case and we find out he's staying somewhere outside of New York City yet, right? And we find out he broke out of 2 federal prisons. He's wanted all over the place. And we trace him out to Long Beach, New York, which is outside of New York. It's in Long Island. And we start going out there. And we start doing legwork out there, stakeouts and stuff. We bring the boss with us on multiple occasions too. And now we're into like the 3rd week, right? Before that, before we even get out of New York, we're also staking out locations. And we also go to a bar mitzvah, which is profiled in the series, right? So getting back to out of New York, we go out there and we find out where he's staying. And we got it pinpointed to an apartment because we traced a license plate that went to a girl and he was using her car. So we go up there and we sort of broke into the apartment, right? Through the super. And we find guns and ski masks and stuff. And we know he's pulling robberies and we got the guns and stuff. But we don't exactly have it legally. So we pack up everything, we leave it there. And we pack up, we lock up the place, and we start continuing our stakeouts. And he's known for walking around with a big dog, big German Shepherd. And we start to stake out, and we got the boss with us again. And we see the guy. And he's a big guy, about 260. He's wearing a black leather jacket and sort of like summertime. And he's walking a monster dog on the boardwalk. And we got him spotted. So we go up and we split up way before the boardwalk. So we come up on all different angles and we're all dressed down. We're not wearing suits or ties or nothing like that, which we didn't wear anyway, but even the boss didn't, right? And we come up front of him, back of him, the side of him. And I don't know why, even to this day, but we didn't really concern ourselves with the dog. We were so concentrated on the guy. This dog might have tore us apart, right? But we just went. And the dog wound up being very cooperative with us in more than one way. So we walk up on him and we get really close and we all draw our guns and we stuck a gun in each ear and in his mouth. He couldn't move, and I grab his wrist because his wrist was in his pocket. And in his pocket, he had his hand on a .38 loaded, and he had like 30 bullets in his pocket. And he had his hand on a loaded gun. So I get his hand out of his pocket. Dog does nothing. We disarm him. We cuff him. And the guy, now here's where the dog cooperated 2 times. First, the dog doesn't do nothing. The dog is stunned and doesn't bite us, doesn't run away, nothing. And then the guy says to us, which was the biggest opening, he says, "You got me. Could you do me one favor?" I said, "What?" He says, "Could you take care of my dog? Could you put him in the apartment?" That leads us into the apartment now, and we get the other guns and the ski mask, right? We say they're in plain view. but we were allowed to go back in the apartment legally because he requested we put the dog away.
Wow.
And then not only he was wanted in so many places and so many charges, but the ATF got involved. They wanted to really hang him because he broke out of federal prison. So they traced the guns to a straw buyer who was a cab driver who bought the guns for him in another state. And they got him to testify. And they wanted me to testify. And I went down to Virginia to testify. And I did it on the feds, paid for everything. I was eating lobster. And and the guy wound up going to jail. He owed I don't know how many years. He owed 36 that I knew of. And then all the shit that he was wanted for other stick-ups and stuff. He wound up dying in jail. Eli Morton Gorin.
Wow.
I wanted to write, the title for that one was going to be, And Not a Shot Was Fired. It was it was one of my best stories.
Yeah.
And there was a gun involved, but we didn't have to use any deadly physical force or any real force. The guy was a monster of a guy, but when I grabbed his wrist and he had a gun in each ear and in his mouth, he knew that was it.
Yeah.
You know, as many shootings that I was involved in, that I had to use my weapon, which was a lot, probably more than any officer today, or then either. I think it could be the most in the country. The thing is, I disarmed so many guys that I would have been justified in shooting that I didn't.
Yeah.
But we disarmed guys all the time with guns. And I'll give you another example. The captain, which was the best captain, who's still alive today and goes to some of our functions. I think he's about 90 years old, Captain Tommy Walker. Best boss in the entire police department. When we were writing the book, me and my co-writer, Pat Piccarelli, I approached the captain, who I stayed friends with all these years. And not only did I work for him as a captain, he was also, this is when I was in plain clothes, anti-crime, and an officer in uniform. He was my lieutenant, and I worked for him as when he became a captain. He came back, and he was such a cop's cop. And we approached him to write the foreword of my book, which I really wanted him to do, which is an honor for someone to do, because I wrote some foreword, but it was more of an honor for me to ask him that he was doing it for me. And he wrote the foreword of my book. And he wrote a story about me in the foreword, which there was a call for a guy firing a gun. And the guy was firing a gun in the middle of the street, a rifle, and just randomly firing. And the cops ran up, and I actually saw this because I was pulling up, and the cop was going like this, firing at the guy, but his bullets were going off before his hand leveled out. The bullets were going in the air. We pulled up, and the captain was there. This Tommy Walker, he went out on patrol all the time and got involved. He was like a cop on patrol. This guy was always involved. He was pulling up as we pulled up, and he saw me get out of the car, and I jumped on the trunk of a car and leaped into the air and grabbed the guy and tackled the guy with the gun. And Tommy Walker saw that, my captain, and he wrote that up for me for a medal. And he remembered that and talked about it and put it as the foreword of my book. You know, now here's places where you were justified in shooting.
Yeah.
Who's randomly shooting in the street.
Yeah.
But this captain, he wrote an incredible foreword for me.
Wow.
Which I was so honored that he did. And he was such a cop's cop, this guy. I mean, I saw him, I'll tell you a fast story too. Well, they're never fast, right? But I saw him command a situation that I'd never seen in my life. And maybe because I wasn't in the military, but he took over like General Patton. Here's what happened. 2 uniforms were driving around, and they saw a guy that looked suspicious, and they went to approach him. And this guy was like 6'5", 220 pounds of muscle, and had shaved head. And you didn't shave your head back then. Today, it's absolutely common in every field. But back then, people didn't shave their head. This guy was a Black Panther, muscular and everything. And he pulled out a gun, and started shooting it out with the cops. They chased him into a building, and that's when he pulled out the guns. And they were running up the stairs of a 5-story walk up. And they shot it out with these police, with the 2 uniformed officers. And when they got to the roof, the officers were smart enough not to go to the roof, come out of the roof landing, because the guy would have had them pinpointed, like they jumped that other car. They know exactly where you're coming out. So they knew enough, and they called for a 1013. Now, everyone responded because they called shots fired with an officer involved, right? So we were in anti-crime, and everyone responded from the precinct. But Captain Walker was out on patrol, and he got there instantaneously. And I don't know where this came from, but he had a bullhorn in the trunk. Anyway, he got out there, and everyone knew him because he was a big statue of a man, besides being the captain. So he got on the bullhorn, and he was directing people. And now it went into what's called a Division 13. That means with all 100 police, there wasn't enough. And he had officers under this 1013 shooting. It's hard to believe because things are going very fast. But he had officers surround the block, made a circle that they couldn't get out. And then he was directing all these officers responding into backyards because they were, next to the building was a courtyard. You go into the backyard. And he was directing people. He was like General Patton. It was the most, probably people saw that in the service, but I never saw that in the street. And this guy took command, and everybody listened to precision. And of course, he directed me, and we were a 3-man team, right? And he sent us into one of the backyards, and the guy came down in our backyard. Then there's hundreds of. We wound up facing the guy, and we disarmed him. We ran right into him. He was coming off the roof down the fire escape into our yard. And we started fighting with this guy. We disarmed him of 2 guns, right? And most guys, he had a 9mm and a 357, I think. And guys didn't carry automatics back then that much. It was very rare. And we disarmed him. This guy fought to the death. This guy needed like 200 stitches. He looked like a train map. Like a train map look. That's what I include, because back then maps were in. No one had Google and computer. And it was amazing. But we got him. But that was thanks to the leadership of this captain.
Yeah.
This captain was such a cop's cop. And the presence of mind to be a leader like that, to taking control of 100 cops that are rushing to a 1013, and cops that went to a 1013 would understand what I'm talking about. And it's something very hard to control because you just want to get there. Seconds. He took command of this situation. It was amazing.